Thanks for coming to our presentation today, everyone. Our presentation is going to be on systems thinking and biodiversity laws.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is what socioeconomic drivers are. So they're basically a root cause of an issue, and they are also structural. So there are many drivers that can affect biodiversity loss, unfortunately. And some of these different types of drivers would be economic growth, population growth, and that sort of thing. In order to address these drivers properly, we need to address them through the systems thinking approach. So what is a systems thinking approach? This view sees the world as a living, breathing thing with very many interconnected parts. So to understand the many issues that come up, we need to acknowledge the underlying relations and connections. So the systems approach thinking allows us to do this as we focus on these type of issues. As we focus on these issues or the socioeconomic drivers. So it's divided up into 4 different parts. So the first level is considered the tip of the iceberg. So this would examine events. So you would only react to observable events, and it sees everything as very linear and unconnected. So one example of a first level thinking would be to create more landfills due to increasing garbage instead of actually addressing the issue of more increasing garbage. The second level would be the patterns and trends. So what's happening, have we been here or somewhere similar before? So this basically looks at different patterns and trends. So you would begin to be able to see the connections and the trends and want to be able to disrupt these patterns. So one example of that would be recycling to try to bring down the amount of garbage that's being produced. The third level would be the structural analysis or the systemic structures. So this is when you begin to examine the social systems that allow these patterns to continue. So this is where you start to uncover root causes and ask what structures are in place that allow these patterns and trends to continue. And then the fourth one here would be either systems goals or mental models. So this is when you really start to dig really deep and you start looking at the dominant values, ideas, that sort of thing that allow these issues to continue to happen. So you would address these issues surrounding the structures. One example of this would be how humans view nature as a resource for them to use and abuse. So this type of thinking would allow us to start to dismantle the values and beliefs that surround these structures that allow the issues to continue to happen. So to properly address an issue, you would need to use all 4 of these levels of thinking. So first you would need to obviously identify the issue, see what's actually going on. You'd want to then begin to uncover the patterns and the trends. Then you would want to find out what structures are driving the trend, and finally you would want to uncover and dismantle the beliefs surrounding these structures that allow us to continue to have these issues happening.
And I'm going to talk about the planetary boundary of biosphere integrity. So the planetary boundaries are 9 human-induced alterations to the Earth systems that can change the Earth's state. So right now, for biosphere integrity, the basically boundary that would keep us in the safe zone for that is 10 extinctions per million species per year, minus 10 times the background rate extinctions, which is normal evolutionary extinction. And so I'm going to focus on biodiversity loss. So a biosphere is the sum total of all ecosystems, and there's 2 parts to the planetary boundary of biosphere integrity, and they are genetic diversity and functional diversity. So genetic diversity is the variety of species within a biome. There has been approximately 50 billion species that have existed over the Earth's entire history, but now we only have 8.7 million due to extinction rates. And the functional diversity is how organisms interact within their ecosystem. So food chains are really important to this, and they're really important in maintaining functional diversity. One example that we learned about in class was how whale feces can stimulate the growth rates of plant plankton, and this plant plankton absorbs carbon dioxide from the air, and eventually it'll sink to the bottom of the ocean, so it lowers the rates of climate change. And drivers behind this, one of the biggest parts to this is extinction, like I mentioned before. And the biggest threat to extinction is the rate of environmental change is becoming too fast for the species to adapt, so they end up dying out, as compared to before when we just had a normal evolutionary extinction, where it's just survival of the fittest and it was like a natural phenomenon causing the extinctions. Other drivers that are more human-induced as well are habitat loss and degradation, species overexploitation like farm fishing, pollution, invasive species and disease, and climate change.
So how are we supposed to address this issue? So we must examine the values in society, and I think the most important place to start this would be to adjust our economic system, so one that does not revolve around money and where we don't place money above the health of our planet. So capitalism is bad for our environment in many different ways, because this overwhelming greed is causing much of this biodiversity loss. So as Maddie explained, a lot of overexploitation through fishing, a lot of urbanization is happening through loss of habitat and degradation. Our overuse of cars and the emissions and stuff is causing climate change, which is also detrimental to these species. So we have to create a more sustainable economy that's going to be able to, support us in the environment for years to come. So we need one that doesn't rely on unnecessary growth. This not going to be an easy task because it involves changing the values of our society that are deeply embedded at this point. So in order to try to change these values, we need the government to change their policies, we need corporations to have to follow more strict rules, and we just need to stop, this idea of overproduction and unnecessary growth. So I think in order to address this, it kind of begins with us and civic engagement. So whether this be writing letters to your government, attending protests, doing boycotts, voting, all that sort of thing. But I think it does start with us, and we do need to address this issue because clearly it is getting out of hand. So I think that's pretty much our project, guys. Did you have anything else you want to add?